We'll be discussing matters that are of pertinence to you and your automobile. As always, we hope to impart to you some useful automotive information and perhaps provoke some automotive conversation on this beautiful Saturday morning in the Mohawk Valley. And certainly the weather here is much nicer than what we're seeing down in the Corpus Christi area this morning. Our prayers are with everybody that's there. We certainly hope that the hurricane is not as damaging as we've seen some in the past. Although it's been 11 or 12 years since I think we've had a major hurricane hit us in this country. So hopefully we've learned some lessons over the decades. But we will talk about what effects that might have on the price of gas, because that'll be a big story once the storm passes. But right now I want to get to our car care tip of the week. And I want to talk about the fatal fifth. And you say to yourself, what is that? Well, we all think that things wear out after time, right? No one disputes that. Replacing a part before it breaks is always wiser than waiting for it to fail. Well, I think radiator hoses are a really good case in point. Product research shows that the failure rate for hoses triples during the 5th year of their lifespan. This is why a lot of people in the automotive business, and myself included, recommend replacing all of your car hoses about every 4 to 5 years. And the 5th year is a good time to do it. And I would do that rather than waiting until a broken one leaves you stranded. So what do? Well, obviously it's not a big deal to check them. You can ask the technician to inspect the hoses whenever you have your car's oil changed. Certainly you can examine them yourself every once in a while. And we talked to the experts at Gates Rubber, which is a well-known manufacturer of rubber car hoses. They really tell us that the failures fall into about 5 categories. First is leaks. Obviously, if you see a radiator hose leak, you know you got a problem. But you want to check especially around the clamps and the connectors. It's even a little seepage that appears minor with an engine off can drain antifreeze fast when the engine's running because it's pressurized. So if you just see this little wet spot near the hose clamp, let's say at the top of the radiator hose, that's a good sign that something needs to be fixed. You say, well, it's not leaking on the ground yet. Well, there's a reason that it's wet. If it's not a loose clamp, you got a problem with the hose or a bad clamp. But for the most part, you probably have a problem with the hose. And remember that when you start the car up and it runs, generally 14, 16, 18 pounds of pressure can be built up in the system. And once you pressurize the system, if there's a leak there, it's certainly going to want to force itself out. Remember, hoses expand and contract slightly with changes in the temperature, which is the other reason why sometimes the hose clamp will loosen itself up. You say to yourself, well, Ed, how does it get loose? Well, it get loose because of this cycle of cooling and heating. One important thing is do not over-tighten a clamp. You can actually break them. I have been guilty of that more than once in my life. So always use a screwdriver and just give it a little turn. You don't put the socket wrench on there and give it a couple of turns. That would not be good. Another cause of failure that helps kill hoses is oil, engine oil. Any type of petroleum product that drips or splashed onto a hose, over time will actually eat the rubber out from the outside. What happens is it seeps into the pores of the rubber and causes the layers of it to separate. Now, mind you, it doesn't happen overnight. But so if you drip anything on a hose, or you're putting a quart of oil in your car or changing your oil, you drip something on a hose, just wipe it off. It's not a problem. You just don't leave it on there. You can generally detect oil damage by feeling for soft or spongy spots or looking for bulges. If a hose is bulging in the middle, kind of like when a snake swallows a rabbit, that's a really good sign that the hose needs to be replaced. Heat, of course, is another really big killer of hoses. And, of course, modern cars today really seal the hoods up good. Under hood temperatures can get as high as 300 degrees. So when we talk about the compact designs of things crammed into small space with very little ventilation, basically all that heat will lead to hardening, cracking, and eventually swelling of a hose. Another thing that's overlooked is ozone. Now, ozone is generated by the electrical systems inside a car, especially under the hood. And again, it's a form of air pollution, and it attacks the rubber. Again, over time, what it tends to do is causes tiny parallel cracks around the circumference of the hose. Usually where a hose bends is where you'll see that. That's why some cars just use what's called a flex hose. So when they have a really sharp bend, it can maintain the shape for a longer period of time. An uncommon thing that happens at times, depending on how your car is built, is abrasion. Now, if you've got a lower radiator hose that's exposed to the ground at the bottom of the radiator, a lot of cars today have like belly pans under the engine, but many of them still don't. And what happens is a road debris or something that flies up can actually gouge or abrade a low-hanging or low-mounted hose. That's something that does happen. So, again, if a car's up on the lift, that's what you want to look at. Have it inspected. Look at your hoses. And probably one of the causes of hose deterioration that really goes unnoticed is electrochemical effects. Now, I've seen the inside of radiator hoses that have been on cars for a lot of years. We've cut them open and looked at them. And what's amazing is, if you think about it, your engine, the coolant reacts with the metal inside the engine. It creates a low-grade electrical charge. We've talked about that over the years as something that literally disables your coolant or your antifreeze's anti-corrosion protection. But it also does a heck of a job on the radiator hoses from the inside out. In many cases, a hose looks really good on the outside, but the inside of it is not so good. It's kind of like an old plumbing pipe that's full of rust. Looks good from the outside, but you can't see what's happening inside because obviously we don't have x-ray vision. So the bottom line, folks, is when you get your car in for an oil change, at least once a year, have the hoses looked at. When you get to be about 5 years old is when you got to start thinking about changing them. Basically, what I do at 5 years old is I swap them all out, and I'll change the antifreeze and flush it out at that time as well. And I would say that over the years that I've done that, probably half the hoses still were serviceably good. But I had no knowing that until I took it off and looked at it. But from a cheap insurance policy, and you put, by the way, whenever you change a hose out, put new clamps on it. Again, the clamps get stressed over time, tightenings and loosening. And I just tend to like to put new clamps on, new hoses, and call it a day. Again, it's part of a long-term plan if you're going to keep a car a long time. If you get rid of cars every 4 or 5 years, then none of this is really going to apply to you. But if you keep a car 10, 12 years, or you buy a car that's 10 or 12 years old, and you're not sure if all those things are good on a car, one of the things you can do is just replace everything. And I realize that costs money. But having a hose fail in the middle of the day while you're driving could cause you a lot of problems. So give that some consideration. And remember the fatal fifth. When it gets to be 5 years old, you really want to pay close attention to those radiator hoses. Folks, it's 15 minutes past the hour. We're going to take a commercial break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about hybrid battery replacements. You're looking to buy a used car? How about one of them nice Toyota Priuses? They're great cars. But we're going to talk about what happens when the battery pack has to be replaced. Hope you'll stick around. I'm Ed Welsh. You're listening to Auto Talk on your News Talk and Sports leader, WIBX 950 and WIBX950.com.